And so I'd appreciate if you would mute. There'll be a part where you'll be able to ask questions, but I've got some questions that I'm going to ask Marvin first. Anyways, I'd like to introduce you, Marvin Dyck, the Vice President of Brewing at Wellington Brewery. I love the fact, for those of you who have gotten it, that we got this large unlabeled can, as part of our tasting process. Anyways, welcome, Marvin, to Beers with Bill. I appreciate you taking the time to join us tonight.
Thanks, Bill. It's a pleasure.
So you picked a topic close to my heart when you wanted to talk about cask beer. So I'm going to let you take it away. I'm not even going to ask any questions on that.
Sure. I know you've had a few guests already, and there's so many different things to talk about. But one of the things that really sets Wellington apart, and like your involvement with Kickoff too, was just the whole idea of casks and cask ale and pins and doing it. So I was fascinated with it. I started at the brewery in 2003. So like I learned, many people have started in different breweries and knew nothing about cask, but it was very much a part of the beginning of my career in beer. So I learned about it early on, and just the nuances with it, and how kind of special it is and steeped in tradition and history. So I've kind of done my approach at recreating a British pub here. So I'm going to tap a cask. I'm going to like go through like kind of a couple of cool things. I'll do it really rapidly, but I'm doing this more for myself too, because with all the public events and stuff that used to happen, you get to tap cast and you get to do this sort of stuff. Well, we haven't been able to do that for so long. So you guys are going to be a part of that whole experience. Unfortunately, we're not going to be running Cask Fest this year in September, which was again like a yearly thing and such a great time. We are going to do something though for people at home. So we're probably going to make up like a special pack of different beers and try to make it sort of an experience that we'll do. Not really sure what we're doing with that yet, but anyway, without further ado, I am thirsty, so I'm going to tap this cask. So I'm sure a lot of you have seen this process before, and I'm getting farther away here. But the whole idea with the cask is that this is a really natural process. This beer came right out of the tank. It was fermented, and then there's the yeast is still in it. But then we also prime the cask. So I take the beer out of the tank and add a little bit of sugar. And the whole idea with this is that I don't want this to be flat beer. Like if you get a cask beer and it's completely flat and still, then it has not been handled properly. There should be some carbonation. It's about roughly half of what a can would be. So the first step when you tap a cask, and this could go horribly wrong, but anyway, I'm in my basement, so is you pop the little tib out in the top. So this top part is called the shive. Sometimes we just call it a bung, and you pop that out, and you should hear a little pressure, which you can probably hear there. All right, that was exciting. Because you want to do that, because when you go to hammer this, serving tap in, if you don't do that, you're going to get a great shower, which I have had many times. So this is really fun. It's really just, you got to go for it. I've got my tap here. Make sure it's closed. I've done that before. I had it open and tried to tap a cask. The mallet is your friend. You really just hold it here and hammer it in. I didn't even make a mess that time. So then we've got our spout. And I'm very thirsty, so I'm going to pour this. So if you can, oh, hold on. Let me readjust this. So you'll see, like there is carbonation here, but it's not as much as you would get from a can. So I trust everybody's cracked their cans. I had one too. So the other thing that's really cool about cask beer is I actually find that the carbonation tastes different as well. So when you carbonate something, like the normal process would be in line where you bubble CO2 and it gets absorbed into the beer. This carbonation actually, it sort of happens from the inside out. So the yeast is breaking down the sugars and creating this carbon dioxide, but it's immediately being dissolved into the beer. It's infused, so it's like I don't know. I think of it as a softer taste, like it's less harsh and very smooth. So cheers, everyone, with whatever you're drinking.
Cheers.
Oh, yeah. Just like being at the pub.
Yeah.
Well, so that's my rambling story about cask beer, Bill.
I like the fact that you said that you've forgotten to close the tap, because I have a habit when we were changing casks, I would leave the tap open so everything would dry out properly.
Yep.
And found out that Troy on 4 different occasions wore it. So then I had to get the habit of, when I came in the next day, close the tap so it was closed for him, because he just wouldn't check it.
No.
And we have had the bung fly up into the ceiling on some of the stuff we got from Flying Monkey was especially really heavily, still activity going on inside the keg. And it would just, you'd hammer it in and it would shoot right back out.
One of my best Cask Fest stories was, I think it was the first year, we got ciders too. And I got one from a cidery and they were very insistent, like, make sure this goes right in the cooler right away. I was just like, I was busy. I'm like, oh, it's not a big deal. I can sit there for a little bit. And after about an hour, just heard this, it sounded like a gunshot, and it just blew the top out of it, and it just created a geyser. So, yeah, you got to be careful with cask too. And don't over prime it. That's a big thing. Like, we've got that kind of down to a science, and people use different things. I know Great Lakes, they'll use honey, which is kind of a cool thing to prime it. The other thing we do is actually just use fresh wort. So that's kind of the most traditional way to do it, is you take a beer that you've just started fermenting and you put some of that back into the cask, and it's called krausening, kind of an older kind of way to do it. But
that's cool. Yeah, but you're right. This is it. I've actually cracked a can of the Arkel as well, and the cask is much smoother.
Yeah, I should do that. Actually, I have another glass.
So for those of you who don't have the 2 beers, this is the beer from the cask, and that's the one from. Not got a good thing there because of the light, but you can see that this has still got yeast in the bottom of it. So it's a little bit hazy.
Yeah. Now, so one of the other things for those that have had cask beer, so traditionally they would fine it. So you'd add some like isinglass to actually make the yeast drop out in the cask, and you shouldn't move it for very long. So when I started, again, 17 years ago, like, cloudy beer was like a no-no. That meant there was something wrong with the beer, that there was infection or something. So most beer was clear. And so the same had to do with cask too. You wanted that cask to be clear. So we would find the cask and it'd have to sit for 24 hours. I mean, anybody that's been drinking beer over the past 10 years has realized that that's vastly changed. And now, like, hazy beer is okay. People start to understand that there's actually flavors. Like, that yeast is a good thing, right? Like, too much yeast is not. It's going to taste very bitter and astringent. But you can have some yeast in there, and it really lends itself to the overall beer experience. So, again, style dependent. Certain styles are better than others like that.
Well, this definitely has that British bitter ale feel to it when you're drinking it.
But yeah, they're very different. The like the can version is much more kind of bright and crisp. Like there's a bit more of a bite from the CO2, really. So, but what a lot of people don't realize is carbon dioxide actually lowers the pH a little bit, so you will get more like of an acidic taste from the carbon dioxide.
Yeah, brings up the acidity level. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good. Anybody has any questions, you can throw them in the chat. I actually am learning to pay attention to it now. I'm getting better at it. And Dave would make me aware.
I was about to say I'm so proud, but I will still monitor closely.
So Marvin, I got a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Marvin and I had a little bit of a quick chat last night. but the beard is epic. I mean, I was just mesmerized by the picture in Baron magazine from like that was 2017, that interview.
Right.
And you made the point when you sent your intro about almost as passionate as the beard, but your beard predates the whole sort of hipster movement inside the craft beer industry. So what was the trigger, the reason to grow the beard?
Great question, Bill. So I've had a long beard for about almost 10 years now. So the first iteration was actually inspired by a craft brewers conference in Michigan that I went to. I went there. I'd always grown facial hair, mostly because I'm lazy and I didn't want to shave. But I met these guys that had huge beards. I'm like, that is really cool. I didn't even think about doing that. So I'm like, well, let's just see if I can do it. So yeah, the first time I went for, I think it was close to 4 years. And then I shaved it off at Cask Fest, actually. Raised some money for charity. It was a whole thing, but instantly hated it. My kids, despised me after that. So I grew it back and have had it trimmed a couple times, but lately it has not been. It's just growing there. It's getting a little bushy. I need some touch-ups, but yeah, predates the hipster movement. So.
Well, that's it. That's interesting that it came out of the trip to a craft beer festival in Michigan.
Yeah.
So because there's a part of me that would almost go, 2003 at Wellington almost puts you as like the grandfather of the craft beer movement in Ontario, because at that point there were not that many craft brewers.
No, there's a lot of older folks that have been doing it longer than me. But I saw the beginning of the OCB, like the Ontario Craft Brewers, and in the very beginning, there were 25 of us. And this is in my time, right? I mean, keep in mind, Wellington started in 85.
Yeah.
So long before I started there. But yeah, there were 25 breweries in the original, and now there's like over 100, but then there's like over 300 in Ontario now. So it's dramatically grown.
Yeah,
a lot.
And a lot of that's been in the last 5 years.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you
Bill,
were
we got a
to
question from Cam. We got a question from Cam in here.
Oh, I was talking to it.
I know.
Oh, yeah, I can see it too.
That's a good point, Cam. He wants to know if the cask product is exactly the same as what you would put in a can or a keg.
It is actually. Yeah, it's exactly the same. The only difference would be the maturation. So we take it, it's in the tank, and then we put it in the cask and prime it, like I talked about, and then it'll actually sit at cellar temperature to develop that natural carbonation, which is a whole different kind of path than the one that's in the tank will get crashed to zero, then it gets centrifuged and carbonated on way there. So other than that, they're exactly the same beer.
Okay.
And in fact, if I'm not mistaken, I think these are actually the exact same. Yeah. The date, yeah, June 20, they're exactly the same batch. So, because yeah, we could have different batches going. There could be a can and then a cask from the different one, but these are the identical same. So,
yeah. So what I was going to ask was, like I said, 2003, 17 years in the industry. We've watched the stellar growth. If there was one thing you could go back and tell your younger self, what would that be?
make an IPA sooner. We were way too late to the game on IPAs. It was partially because one of the owners at the time had an aversion to IPAs and anything hoppy, and was convinced that they were just a trend. And anyway, that in hindsight, we really should have launched one. We could have beat everyone to the punch, right? But anyway,
That's
hindsight.
true. You could have, yeah.
But we got to make Upside that I see somebody drinking there. Yeah.
So Ed wants to know what the date on the cask batch is, so he can check his Arkel cans.
June 29th.
Terry and Emma, what was the first Wellington IPA? Because I don't even remember when you brought out your first IPA.
Well, we did a whole lot of small batches. I think literally it was called Wellington IPA, and it had the round stickers. Does anybody remember those round stickers on?
Oh, I do remember that. and
then, yeah.
And pardon me, Marvin, I'm doing this. It was in my brain, and it was only because, as much as I like English ales, I was like, this is the first time Wellington made a beer I love.
Yeah.
And Greg wasn't my beer rep at the time, but the person that was the beer rep was really offended when I said, you know, whoever's doing this, tell them they're doing a fantastic job on the one-offs. They're the best beers I've got going.
Well, that was when I finally got to brew. Like our very first one-off was 2007, I believe. Maybe it was later than that. But I brewed with the hops that were growing outside the brewery. I used a different malt that we'd never used before, and that was Oast House. That was the first one, and we let the public name it. Yeah, and then from there it was just like I just kept bugging them until they let me brew stuff that I wanted to make. So
that's great. I have another question. This is just a just for kick question. What would happen if you let a carbonated beer go flat and then recarbonate it?
So the problem with losing the carbonation is that you're going to allow oxygen in, and then you're going to oxidize the beer. So you'll end up changing the flavor of it. The malts oxidize as well as the hops. And then if you recarbonated it, it would really take on a different taste. But that's kind of an interesting concept I hadn't really thought about. But
yeah, but I hear you on that. You're oxygenating it to begin with.
Yeah.
And then the second you recarbonate it, you've completely changed that, especially on the malt side, you've changed that profile.
Yeah.
So,
which could be okay. I mean, a little bit of oxidation in certain styles is actually really pleasant, right? I mean, a good barley wine needs some oxidation. Otherwise, they don't taste that good.
Yeah, that's true. They want to know if Kicking Back is coming back.
I second this.
We had to discontinue it because it wasn't selling. But I don't know. So you guys got a preview of our new crowlers. We are going to start doing those. So what it does give us the flexibility of doing is that if I were to brew, say, Kicking Back, we then have a way to sell it, because we can't justify like getting printed cans or even wrapped cans of Kicking Back. Anyway, but it's noted. I loved Kicking Back. It was definitely one of my favorite beers, but
oh, you won awards with that.
Yeah. And it's just sometimes like I love Upside. I drink a lot of it, probably too much. And like at 6.8%, it catches up with you pretty quick. So it's nice to be able to have like a few of a lower alcohol beer. So, which is why Arkel's so amazing, right? I'm not going to drink this entire pin, but we'll try. No.
And just to reiterate on that, like, I think, Marvin, I'm pretty sure I spent an entire summer, I don't remember if it was 17, 18, or 19, but only drinking Kicking Back, which was both a very delicious and also very dangerous summer.
Nice.
Things that come out in the stories, David.
I am unapologetically me, and you know that. It's not good, but it is me.
Nice.
Terry, so, can you unmute yourself and explain to me that question? Terry Labatt.
Sorry, the idea of the question was just, what if you took a beer that had been carbonated with carbon dioxide, then let it go flat and stuck that in a cask?
And put some wort or something else into it, let it naturally recarbonate.
Yeah.
I see.
But I think the answer is probably still the same, right? If you're going to oxidate, you're going to get something different, maybe not what you wanted.
Yeah. Did anyone ever go? I remember being excited about cask beer and not being able to find it anywhere. And then I realized that at some bars they ran these beer engines, but they were just fake beer engines. So they would actually hook up like keg beer in the back, and so they'd pull it and it would look. And I got so confused because I'm like, why is it so carbonated? I really just want like a cask beer, and they're just like fake engines. So it kind of made me think about that. It's like that's what they were trying to do, is like send something like artificially carbonated and then like pour it on cask, and it just doesn't really work. So cool, good question.
Yep. Chirag, I would try that out right now, except that my wife would be annoyed with me if I did that to her soda stream. He was wondering if you could recarbonate it using the soda stream, and the answer would be probably. There'd be no problem.
Yeah, I've got an intern right now who's a really bright kid, and we're kind of working on something where we could, create a beer, but then you just like, you rehydrate it like a dried beer. So like using the soda stream idea with water, and then you just create a beer. I don't know if it's even possible, but it's kind of a fun little experiment. We're going to try something like that.
Barbarolo was looking at that with
beer before.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, it was available for camping. You bring powder beer. Does that sound familiar?
Yes.
Weird.
It was a 1-year wonder.
Yeah, probably didn't taste good.
Also heard of that one a couple years back.
You just got to add rubbing alcohol. It's safe.
Oh.
Bill, I'm also totally volunteering my backyard to try out this soda stream beer idea. We can make that our first viral YouTube video. Hipster and old man die in backyard trying something stupid.
I didn't know you were going to die in that process, David.
Somebody's got it, I think.
Derek wants to know, once you tap a cask, what's the shelf life?
I would say like 2 days. So we'll tap them, and then like you can drink it the next day as well. Like if you have a really trained palate, you can probably taste a bit of the oxidation. But again, like if you, so if you don't move it, so like when we do Cask Fest, we have 2 different types of spiles. Sorry, the name escaped me there for a second. There's a breathable one and a hard one. So the theory is you tap the cask. So you guys heard that there's CO2 that's built up in the headspace. There's going to be a little bit of headspace. So as long as you don't move it, as you draw off it, the CO2 should kind of blanket the top of it for a bit. Now, it will kind of mix with the oxygen as you draw it in, but it should be good then for the second day. Now, what some bars will do is they'll put what's called a cask breather on. And what it does is as you draw, it replaces the air with CO2. So you can actually get up to like a week's out of a cask. Now, there's this campaign for Real Ale Camera in the UK, and they would say that that is not traditional and you can't do that. But I mean, to me, it's just, that kind of makes common sense if you're not going to go through your cask in 2 days. So
I've seen that procedure where they spray something in a bottle of wine at a bar to coat the top layer to reduce and they could serve it longer than just opening it and serving it 8 hours later. Is that what you're talking about?
That's the concept, yeah, because CO2 is heavier than air. So like as long as you're not sloshing it around, like that should stay as a blanket on top of the beer. And there was enough headspace in it, because you don't, like the other thing, people like, you don't fill this all the way to the top. There needs to be headspace for the pressure to build up in it in order for it to work properly.
So what do you do with the cask if you bring a series of them to a festival and you don't kill them all? Do you just try and drink it at the end of the festival, or like with a keg, you can just take it home and hook it up again? But what do you do?
Yeah, that's so. We dumped way too much beer like the first Cask Fest, and then we kind of got a little smarter about it. And so like you get to know, like we would stop actually tapping stuff like towards the end of a session in order to not waste beer like that. But we also, there's always an after party where you do try to consume as much as possible. Yes. It just has to be done. I mean,
if you need any volunteers.
I was going to say, you've opened up a can of worms with that one.
Usually a bunch of thirsty pourers, aren't there? They've been watching other people drink all day.
That's true. Yep. 100%.
Opened up a keg of worms.
A cask.
Well, that's an interesting question, Cam. Present day cask product, give us a good example of how beer historically was served, stored before kegs were used, or does it differ?
From my knowledge, I would say that it definitely does. And from what I understand, like they had bottles back, 1800s and stuff, but carbonation would have been very different. It would have been a lot lower. They were more like growlers. They would have tops, like more the swing top, if you know that, like that style.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, they would be. I would think it would match a lot. That's a great question.
Yeah, and he also wanted to know if the lower carbonation level in cask sort of matched the way cask bottles would have been done in the past.
Yes, I believe it would be. They wouldn't have been carbonated nearly as high as they are now. Like to me, to my knowledge, that was like with macro lagers, they started taking the CO2 higher to basically to try to get more mouthfeel, because like the beer is so like there's nothing there, right? You've got rice, corn, different adjuncts. Like there's very little mouthfeel with those ingredients. So the more carbonation you add, the more it kind of like coats your mouth. But then yeah, it's also makes you more gassy and yeah. But I definitely historically everything would have been much lower.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I did the tour at Anheuser-Busch in St. Louis, Budweiser tour, and they talked about that, but I don't recall what they were discussing about the actual carbonation levels. I was more intrigued by the picture of 1,700 women whose only job was to put caps on beer.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was 1903, and it was like, that's a lot of beer.
Exactly.
Because they were expected to cap 10 bottles a minute.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh. So we were going to do the Russian Imperial Stout as well. Do you want to do that?
Yeah.
Now?
Let's do that. So again, this is one of the very old beers that we've had. I call it the Gateway Imperial Stout because it's actually at the bottom end of like the alcohol amount for an Imperial Stout. A lot of them, they can go up to like 12% or so. This is only 8%. But yet we try to get as much body into it as possible. Because again, like alcohol gives you mouthfeel, gives you body, and then the malt and then the residual sugar also will leave you with a lot of body. So, and this is another cool story. So this Imperial Stout, we moved to only doing it seasonally in the LCBO. And then actually Arkle and Stout are the same. This is, if you want to look for one positive from COVID, I mean, there are many, but Arkle is back full time now, which is really only a result of COVID because we have a new way to sell it. Because it doesn't sell well enough in the LCBO, but with our direct delivery and walk-up window, we're selling enough of it to justify. And the same with the Imperial Stout. We would normally not have it this time of year because, to be fair, like most people don't drink a lot of stout in the summer when it's really hot. But I mean, I still enjoy a good stout once in a while, and it's just nice to have that sort of body and flavor. So, yeah, this is our Imperial Stout. I wanted to feature it again because it is available for the summer. And I also, one of our favorites at the breweries, we actually will mix Arkle and Stout together, like half and half. So you end up with like a 6% beer with, that's kind of a cool thing. So if you've got both of them, you can try that with me, or we can just try the Stout on its own.
Well, I was happy to see that you had it because I have the cellaring 6 beers challenge to everybody, and I now have 6 of those cans sitting in my cellar.
Nice.
So 3 months from now, I'll be opening the next one. And that way, and oh, by the way, for those of you who haven't, and on the Wellington website, there's a wonderful flavor wheel that you can use for beer.
Yep.
Hey Marvin, quick question. When you're doing the mix of the Arkell and the stout, is that something, because I noticed it was in the email as well as something you were touting, is that something that you can actually bottle or can, or is the way that the bottling process works, it doesn't really let you mix?
No, we can do that. That's another, like, what I wanted to talk about a bit, and I've been talking about this at work a bit with some of the employees, like a whole area. So like sour beers are always blended. If anyone has knowledge of like the true Belgians, they're always blended beers. But like most of your traditional styles, like North American styles, you never think about blending. But really what you can do is you can blend it in the bright tank or the packaging tank. So we actually do this from time to time, just because, like, why not? So we'll take 2 beers. One of the cool ones we did is I blended Kicking Back and Upside before, and we released it for a festival. But that way, like, I could make, like, there's something about Upside with the alcohol. It pulls a lot of the hops out. You just can't get that in a lower alcohol beer. So I took the benefit of that from the Upside and then blended it back with the Kicking Back to make something around 5.5%. So it kind of just created this cool like hybrid beer. But anyway, I'm getting philosophical about blending. But yeah, we can do it like basically with anything in the packaging tank. So we'll process them like through our centrifuge into 2 different bright tanks, and then we'll just kind of blend like that. It's another thing you can do is like adjust alcohol that way. So say one batch is like a little bit out of spec, you can always like blend it with another batch to do that. Now, obviously when you blend, I do it in the lab first. So I'll take, okay, I want to try this much of this and this much of that. You do a little blend, try it, see what it's like. But yeah, it's kind of like it's a whole new frontier really, and it's a lot of fun. I mean, you're blending beers and trying them. So
That's very intriguing. I really like that blend. I can understand why the guys at the brewery like it. It really smooths everything right out.
yeah, because there's definitely like there's a bitterness to the Imperial Stout, which is meant to be there, but sometimes you want to like not have that much. And the Arkell, despite it having the word bitter in it, everyone knows that's the style name. It's really not that bitter. So they do complement each other pretty well. So
yeah. So I have a couple questions for you from online here. The first one being able to sell out of the window. Has that changed your mix of beers versus selling to bars, restaurants, and the LCBO?
So what it made us realize rapidly is that we're selling even more of our one-offs than we were before. So we used to kind of set, all right, so if we did around 1,000 cans, that was like a good amount that would last us for, you know, a full month, and we'd sell through it at a good rate. But all of a sudden, everything's been thrown out the window, quite literally. And so it's, yeah, like we've had to up amounts and do more frequent one-offs, and I'm trying to madly to brew more basically for that. So the window has definitely changed that angle, and we're still selling lots of our core brands, but yeah, and we were selling lots of Kicking Back. Well, I think we put it on sale and we were going through the last of our cans, and then yeah, it just sort of disappeared. So we'll stop talking about Kicking Back. I'm sorry.
Dangle it in front of them.
Yeah, I know, it's horrible.
I love it. I love it. Derek wants to know what led to the switch to 8% for the stout, the Russian Imperial Stout.
Oh, so ours actually, at least in my time, was always 8%. But a lot of other ones are higher. So we actually do the UVB stouts as well. They are not the same stout. I know it's confusing. We had 2 Imperial Stouts for a time, but it entirely different recipe, and it is brewed to 10% and then aged in bourbon barrels, which bumps the alcohol up to 11.9.
Okay, I'm making that up. Back in the day, 10 years ago, I used to drink it all the time at Grad House. They'd even give it to me in a pitcher once in a while, and I seem to recall it being 10.5, but not.
You were mistaken on that.
Too many of them.
I remember that they sold it in pitchers. Yeah, that was awesome.
The best deal in the land. Didn't get better. Same price as anything else, too.
So Magic 8 Ball wants to know, what have you learned from COVID about production process?
I learned that I'm very thankful that we expanded the brewery when we did, because if this were in the olden days when we were all in that one small building, like we were on top of each other like all the time, like packaging, brewing, everybody. So thankfully, like we spread everything out a lot. So it's actually been fairly easy to operate safely with, keeping everyone safe, all the workers and everything. So because we're able to spread out so much, and because what we did when we expanded is we basically invested in equipment that meant that we kept the same number of people, but improved efficiencies around. So it wasn't like we all of a sudden got bigger and then needed more people. Like we kept the same number of people, but spread everything out. So that's what I've learned. And don't stop brewing beer when you think the world is going to end. Just keep brewing. That's the other thing I've learned. Because we sort of like, everybody was just held their breath, right? And like, what on earth is going to happen? So should we just stop production? So we like slowed down, and beer takes time to make. So we ran out of a few things. It was never like crazy bad, but there were some stretches where we were out of product because we should have been brewing right away. So that's what I've learned. Whatever happens in the world, just keep brewing.
Kind of like the band
people are just going to drink more and more beer. That's the time to turn it up.
Yeah, we didn't know if people were going to be able to buy it. That was the big thing, right? Because there was still, they thought, people were saying, oh yeah, they're going to shut the LCBOs down, and like if we lost the LCBOs, then all of a sudden, yeah, we'd still sell a lot out of our retail and that, but it's not as big a channel as the LCBO. So
I was just gonna say, it's kind of like the band, like it's like don't stop playing as the Titanic goes down. It's like keep going, man. Just like it'll be fine.
Oh, that's a great mental image, yeah. Because there's those paintings, right, of them still playing as it's sinking. So just need a little brew equipment and just me there still brewing. And yeah,
I'll see. I don't have much Photoshop skills. I'll see what I can come up with though.
Cool.
So Marvin, along the same questions of COVID, you did a great interview with Bear Magazine in the past, and you talked about the lessons learned in you needed to find new channels for your beer, and you needed to make people aware of where and what Wellington was. What's the biggest challenge that you have right now because of COVID?
Yeah, the biggest challenge is really, because our business model is such that we're a production brewery, so we have our core brands that we produce a lot of for the LCBO, but we also like to experiment and be creative. So we really have these two streams and this small batch program, but it's like both streams are running at full speed right now. And like normally you can kind of like ebb and flow between the two. And I'm realizing that I don't really have like enough staff to do that properly. And I'd like to really use this opportunity, I think, to enhance our one-off program in small batch and just do it more strategically, like up the number of brews we do. But yeah, like I can't be doing that full time plus like all the other sort of work too. So yeah, that's kind of the big takeaway for me, is that I really need to kind of look at this model that we have and potentially look at some additional people, or I'm not sure. So
I have a question, Papa. Wants to know when UVB will be available again.
It should be along the same timeline. We have it's sitting in the barrels right now. We'll probably release at the end of November again, or mid-November. I think it might be a bit earlier because we were looking at doing, well, again, we might not, because we did the UVB, we've done the UVB day, but I don't know if we'll be able to, again, up in the air, but we will release it in November. So
Ed wants to know if there's any fun stories from Cask Fest and who decided to rack a beer directly into a pumpkin.
That was the Monsters of Schlock. That was totally their idea. I had seen it done before, but they were the ones that convinced me to do it. And I mean, the best story, or the worst story, is still when they shaved my beard off and then decided to light it on fire. That was the worst. I mean, it was so anticlimactic because there was so much hair, like it was basically as big as this, and then they lit it on fire, but it didn't just burn like right away. It took like a full, like, I don't know, like 30 seconds to burn. So everybody just sitting there watching this fire of hair, and then it starts to smell really bad because it was under the tent, and it was don't ever do that. So
We're trained professionals. Do not do this at home.
yeah, do not burn beards.
Cam wants to know, well, he used to do more varieties of big stout, Sputnik, Kentucky Cow, Spice Odyssey. Are some types of stouts more successful in general versus others?
Yeah, our chocolate milk stout, I'm actually brewing it Thursday. I'm going to do a small batch of it just because it also seems to sell year round, and it's really successful. And it's a really, we actually brought the alcohol down a bit. It's 6.6 now. Originally it was 7.1. Just tried to make it a bit more drinkable and a little more, but with the lactose, like the sweet stout, it's still got a ton of the chocolate, cocoa and flavor as well. So yeah, look for that in about 3 weeks or so. So yeah, that's probably one of the ones that we had it in the LCBO. It's one of the ones we're probably going to submit it again. It's just it's a good crowd pleaser and great beer.
Shrug, mango sour? You'll have to enlighten me. I missed something.
Piñata? That's the ginger peach, right?
Right. That's, sorry, not mango, ginger peach.
Yeah.
I thought I recognized it. I was asking Chirag the question. Speaking of your one-offs, one of the things I did in my order was grab as many of them as I possibly could, including the habanero, and I was really disappointed it sold out and I couldn't get more.
Oh, yeah. We'll be bringing that back from time to time because it's just one of those ones that is really fun to do, and people either love it or hate it. It's awesome to see the Untappd ratings on it because it basically gets a 1 or a 5. So
love it or hate it beer.
Yeah, and then people will be, it's too spicy. I'm like, well, what did you think you were getting into here? I mean, it's quite obvious what it is. There's fire on like the label. Like
the only thing is, if you're not prepared, the first time you have it and you burp and it fizzes up your nose,
yeah,
it burns.
Yes.
Aside from that, it's fantastic. It's habanero. I expect it to be hot, and I love that it doesn't mellow at all.
Yeah.
This ice cream's too cold.
I like drinking my beers warmer.
Yeah, you get the flavor. There is really like we try to put that on our cans too. It's kind of a suggestion, but it's there generally is a best temperature to actually drink beer at, depending on what the style is, and yeah, a little bit warmer typically, not ice cold. I mean, I like my lagers ice cold, but
that's the way you're supposed to drink them.
Yeah.
We had a question actually from Shrug about experimentation a little bit earlier.
I did miss that one, yes.
Yeah, no worries. I got you. Do you want to go ahead and ask it?
No, you go ahead.
I'll go ahead.
Yeah, that was yours. So.
My question was, what is your experimentation process for new beers? Like, do you do small batches? I don't know, test runs?
Yeah, we have our pilot system that does like 500 liters, but we can actually do less. Like sometimes we'll only do 300. And sometimes a lot of the experimentation actually starts with blending. So say we do a fair number of like fruit and different ones. Like I'm working on like a dark sour beer. So like first step is actually, okay, I'm going to take one of the dark beers I already have, County. I'm going to add a bit of acid to it. I'm going to add some fruit just to start getting my brain working as to like, is this a good direction to go before I spend all the money on ingredients and do like a bigger batch. Like, let's make sure that these kind of things work together first. So that's sort of the first step. And then it will be, okay, this is the right direction. Now let's brew on our pilot system. Let's get the ingredients in and see what we can produce. And like, sometimes they turn out and sometimes they don't. Like at that point, generally we can sell it, but sometimes they're just like, you know what, that was an okay beer, but it's not really, wasn't great. Like we're not going to be brewing 4,000 liters of that. So good question.
So along that lines, I have a question. I got to get my book so I make sure I get the thing right. So when you, in 2015, you first brewed Kicking Back, and we're going to go right back to that one.
It's the theme.
That's the theme, yep. You used 100% Ontario hops from Clear Valley in Nottawa.
Yep.
How did you guys arrive at that decision?
So I actually met Lori at the Canadian Brewing Awards in Fredericton, New Brunswick, of all things. And I listened to her talk about it, and like she's very inspiring and really knows her stuff. And yeah, she just kind of like wowed me with her knowledge and talking about the terroir up there and what her hops could do. And so yeah, then I traveled up there, got to walk through the hop farm, really liked what she was doing. So yeah, we decided to go 100% behind that. And yeah, I mean, we thought it would be like people would latch onto that more than they did, but it seemed actually, and we tried to rebrand it even, that just didn't seem to resonate with like the broader, like I know our local customers get that and appreciate it, but it didn't seem to really resonate like for an LCBO brand. So I'm not sure why, but we're not really big enough to do some of this market analysis that we probably should be doing. We're getting there. So yeah, good question.
Ed wants to know if you sell your pilot batches at the brewery.
Yes, generally if there's something that's, that we've done and we have fun with. So for a period there, we weren't as much because we would partner with licensees, like I've done some with Cam before, and like those smaller batches, it doesn't really necessarily make sense for us to do cans or whatever. Yeah, so we would just do it in kegs, and then we would sell it in growlers. Now we have a crowler machine, so we're going to start selling those out of the retail, the walk-up window and that. So that's going to be another way to get these experimental one-off beers. And sometimes we do run them in cans just because we're doing Black is Beautiful. That was a collab. We did the All Together IPA. So yeah.
Okay. Graham has a question, or should I say Magic 8 Ball? Which comes first, the vision of how it should taste, or do you follow a framework and taste path after you start?
I've done both, really. Often it's the vision that kind of comes first, and yeah, but both are applicable.
Can I quickly follow up on that? I want to know, has there been, maybe not even like mass production, but even if it was like a one-off where kind of from Graham's idea, like where you sort of just were like, I'm just going to try a bunch of like ingredients or whatever, that kind of like the taste path kind of comes afterwards, and it turned out like really well.
Yeah, the one that comes to mind is Terrestrial. When I first brewed that, I don't think I even did a pilot batch. That was back on our old system. So I wanted to make a black IPA because I'd had some and really enjoyed them. And I just messed up. Like I didn't put enough dark malt in and it turned out brown. So we're like, oh, I can't call this a black IPA. So it became Terrestrial, a brown IPA, and became like one of our best beers that we brought back time and time. Actually, it's gonna come back again too. I'm gonna brew it next month, along with Against the Current. We're gonna do that. It's gonna come back. So yeah, we got lots planned again because things are selling really well, and there's some of these brews that we've done that we just haven't done in a while. So why not bring them back? Because they were great beers.
Yeah. Derek is dragging us back to kicking back. So this is his fault. It didn't sell well. So if it didn't sell well at the LCB, he wants to know what
Is COVID making us drink more? Is that what you're saying?
Yep.
And what he wants to know, what's that process? Do you just let it sit on the shelves, or do you actually pull it back so that it doesn't go beyond its optimal life cycle?
So we don't entirely have control over that either. So basically we have to meet with the LCBO like once a year, and they'll just straight up tell us like, this is not performing. You either swap it out for another brand or you're going to lose the listing. So it's like different than the beer store where you pay for listings. Even there are thresholds though that you have to meet. So if you don't meet them, then they will pull your product.
So would they just keep trying to sell the beer for the rest of the year? Do they pull the plug and say, this is not worth it, we're going to dump it? Or not just kickback, just any theoretical beer? I'm curious.
So we can do a return to vendor as well. So because what happens is, like, for instance, Faces got released into the LCBO, but there are tiny little LCBOs that there's probably not a single person that goes there that has ever drank a double IPA in their life. So it's going to sit there on that shelf, right? So we know that, and we have to fill out a form and we can get it back. So we're going to do that. So we have some control over that. And then they're pretty good. Like if it goes past expiry, they will just pull it and send it to be destroyed. But we have some power to kind of facilitate that. So we try to manage that as best we can.
Yeah, powers that be have those decision processes sometimes, don't they?
Oh, yes.
Now, I have one last question for you.
All right.
Obviously, Wellington's going to be your favorite brewery. If you're not drinking at Wellington, who's your next favorite brewery to go to?
Oh.
You were driving down the road, Lauren, and talking to us.
Yeah, just a little bit.
You know,
your favorite American. She's
Lauren, no.
Don't do it, Lauren. No.
I love
There's cops everywhere.
I'm recording this. You realize the police will ask for a copy of it if you have a problem.
Well, I saw one in a sedan just on the right side of the road. Maybe that one wants one.
Graham's got it right. Cover up the eyes. Can't see. We're gonna go back to our conversation, Lauren. You have a safe trip.
Yeah. Thanks, you guys.
All right.
I'll go back to that question.
My favorite brewery.
Apart from Wellington.
I said Founders there, but in the States, I don't know. I love many breweries. A lot of it is really about the people, and there's so many great people out there. So I can't really name one. It's like picking a favorite child. So.
Okay. Well, what's your favorite style then?
I do love IPAs, really, and like most IPAs, except I'm not a huge Belgian IPA fan. That's my one little dirty secret.
Why would that be?
I don't know. I don't like the mix of hops and like the yeast esters. It's just a preference thing. You know, actually, my big dirty secret is I love beer that's in green glass. Heineken, Moosehead. I just have this little thing for it. I don't know. I like skunky beer. I actually purposely will sit my beer out in the sun sometimes just to skunk it up.
I can see Terry just laughing over there. Is that a holdover from childhood?
I have no idea. I don't know what it is.
Todd asked it much more succinctly than me. He wants to know, what is the favorite beer that you've ever brewed?
That I have ever brewed.
Yeah. What's your favorite beer to brew?
I think I'm going to come back to the terrestrial because I haven't done it in a long time, and I'm super excited about doing it again. So again, it's an IPA, but it's a brown IPA. It's not one of those common ones. So I do love Faces. I brewed another Faces today, actually. So we will have that again, a small batch, like there'll be 1,000 cans or so. But yeah, I love throwing hops and things.
Enough description. Yes, you love throwing hops. But yeah, terrestrial is excellent beer. I am glad to hear that's coming back.
Yeah.
So, and hi, Todd. I'm going to stop the recording now, and I'm going to let you guys carry on with any question you want. You can all unmute, and it can become a free-for-all. Is that okay, Marvin?
Sure thing.